For the last few weeks, I've been talking about sponsoring the podcast because as the show's grown, we've gotten contacted by a lot of corporations with big ad budgets, but I don't feel good about that. It doesn't feel like it measures up to the kind of integrity that I want to have. But I know that there's a lot of people listening to this who are out there creating independent businesses and projects, and you're trying to find ways to promote that doesn't feel like you're selling your soul. And the reality is if you're listening to this, then chances are the people who would be interested in what you do are also listening to this. And sponsoring the podcast is an excellent way to connect to those people. And I'm super excited about those of you who have already reached out. You're going to get to learn about some of our new sponsors very soon. But listen, there's only so many slots available, and they are starting to fill up. And frankly, people who are taking spots are renewing because they're seeing a positive impact. So if it's something that you've been considering, now's a good time to jump in. Go to jbrownyoga.com/sponsor. Okay, are you ready? Well, of course you're ready. You just hit play. The question is really, am I ready? Yes, I'm ready. So, welcome to you. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown, and I am coming to you remotely from London, England. I am here once again. I'm doing some teaching here this weekend. This is my second time here. I was here once before last year, and I just had my first workshop of the weekend this evening, and it's already going wonderfully. And I'm once again shocked by the percentage of people who are coming just because they listen to the podcast and they want to hang out. It's so fun. Thank you. Thank you, podcast listeners who show up to live events and hang out with me and connect face to face. It's very rewarding. I really appreciate it. So thanks to you. And I hope you're all doing well. Hope you guys had an okay week. Once again, I have to say, leaving the United States, there's like a visceral feeling that I have. It seems like such a shit show in my country right now. And I had lunch today with UK friends, and we were discussing politics, and they were like asking me these questions about what the hell's going on. And then I was asking them about what the hell's going on here. And I got an email a few weeks back from a listener who was somebody from the other side of the political spectrum from me. And he was, calling me out on some comments I had made the last time I talked about politics on the podcast, which is not very often. But the last time I talked about politics, I was just like upset about what seemed to me to be like hatred. And this listener was sort of saying, hey, not all of us people on this side are full of hate and you shouldn't generalize. And, I responded very respectfully, but made some points. I didn't hear back from that listener. I sure hope that person's still listening. I'm sure there's plenty of you out there who maybe have a different viewpoint than me. And I appreciate that. I am trying to bring people on who don't just see things the way that I see them. But I've always known that we had like a corrupt government. But it seems really blatant in a way like I've never seen it before. And I just have to say, to all of my like left-wing liberal friends, the Democratic Party is not really representing very well. Not in my opinion. I want to see Medicare for all. I want to see Green New Deal. I want to see it. AOC, man, AOC. I'm getting myself in so much trouble now. I'm sure everybody's going to, but it seems to me that even the leaders of the Democratic Party are having to take money from lobbyists and interest groups so that they can give that money to the people in the party so that they can win their elections. And that cycle just equals us not having representation. It is like taxation without representation. And, in France, they're coming out with yellow vests, man. People in France, they're not messing around. So I wonder, how long would it take before, people will be out on the streets in America. Would that ever happen, or will we just like allow our country to become a dictatorship or something? I'm not suggesting that's going to happen. I just went a little too far, maybe, but still, doesn't seem like things are going very well. And I'm still hoping for the pendulum swing the other way. So or whatever it is, there you go. I talked politics. Oh no, why did I do that? It was on my mind because people were asking me from another country, and I gotta say, it feels embarrassing. I sure hope that we can get it together some. Anyways, today on the podcast, I'm talking with Annie Carpenter. And I don't know if you know who she is. I've never met her before, but it was very easy to connect with her in this conversation. It felt like I was talking to a friend or a colleague, and it was very, very easy. And I was really happy to get this chance to learn a bit about her and to get her perspective on things. She was a very instrumental teacher at YogaWorks. She was there when Matthias Ratti sold it to the corporation that it became, and she helped develop the initial 200-hour training there. But she no longer believes in 200-hour trainings, which you will hear. And we recorded this like a long while back. I think I mentioned last week that this one's been like sitting on the shelf for a long time because the way the timing worked out, we recorded it, but it just didn't seem to fit in with what was going on the podcast. So I was just like waiting. And then last week, I put out my conversation with Carrie Mayaker from the Yoga Lines, which I didn't hear much about, just a little bit. But as usual, no one had much to say. I understand. But this conversation is a very good follow-up, I think, because this is the conversation that a lot of folks, I think, are maybe more interested in hearing, which is what does it really look like on the ground? And how has that evolved and changed over the years? And someone like Annie really has a vantage point that offers us useful perspective. So I am very excited for you to hear that today. And next week, I have another very exciting guest, which I'll tell you about in just a moment. First, I want to say something to any of you who are having to manage studios. Are you using MindBody Online? Probably, because they kind of got a lock on it, don't they? Well, not really, because there's an alternative. And today's sponsor, KarmaSoft, is that alternative. If you've been listening, you've heard me talk about KarmaSoft before because it's the software that I personally used when I owned a center. The owner, Rudy Senecal, he's been on the show before. You should go back and listen to that episode. We talk all about the company and my experience of using the software. By far, it's way better than MindBody Online. And you're dealing with Rudy, who's like a yogi and like a cool guy, and you don't get that same crappy feeling. So listen, if you or someone you know is a yoga, Pilates, or fitness center owner, manager, or teacher, and you have to do that work of scheduling and class payments and accounting, all of it can be made far easier and more efficient by using KarmaSoft. Go check it out. Go to karmasoftonline.com. Now, as I was saying, next week I have an exciting episode to share. I will be talking with Rachel Brethen, a.k.a. Yoga Girl. Do you know who she is? Probably anybody under a certain age knows exactly who she is, and a whole bunch of people over a certain age don't. I don't know what that cutoff is, but Rachel is a very well-known Instagram yogi. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I know people got upset with me about using that word Instagram yogi, but she is one of the first people who really launched a career off of Instagram as a yoga teacher. And frankly, I did not know what to expect. It was quite a process of making it happen. Rachel does have, a team of people, and she's got a busy schedule, and so coordinating and kind of making it happen was a thing. And I was kind of surprised that she even agreed. I know Rachel has her own podcast too, but It's a really great conversation. And it was really enlightening in many regards. Rachel really kind of opened up and was very honest about a lot of stuff. And it's very, very cool. You guys can check it out next week. Let me also just drop my stuff real quick. I have got some upcoming gigs. I'm going to be in Hamilton, New Jersey, February 9th. I'm going to be in Portland, Maine, February 23rd and 24th. And I'm going to be in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, March 16th. I'm going to teach a workshop in the afternoon, and then I'm going to do a live podcast event. That's March 16th in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, at the old space on 628 Metropolitan Avenue, which is now Good Yoga. I'm doing a live podcast event. So if you're going to be in Brooklyn or in the New York metro area, or even the surrounding areas you might want to drive in, it's going to be very exciting. That's March 16th, Williamsburg, Brooklyn. You can find out about those gigs and more. You can listen to the archives of the podcast, read my blog, and find all of my online yoga video stuff at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, I will touch base with you on the other side, maybe just clue you into some other things that are happening. But for now, let's do this. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Annie Carpenter. Hello?
Hi.
Is this Annie?
This is Annie. Is this James? Is that your name?
No, my name is Jay. It's short for Jason, actually.
So we just say Jay.
Yeah, most of my friends call me Jay. When I first moved to New York, there was another Jason Brown teaching yoga already. So all my friends used to call me Jay anyway, so I started going by Jay Brown since back then.
And do you have an affinity to birds that are called Jays?
No, I hadn't really thought about it in terms of birds before. But I do always like that it's kind of a J period, which is sort of a little bit eccentric and everyone doesn't really know what the name is, because I always thought my name, Jason Brown, was kind of boring. And it was sort of a way to spice it up or something.
And it's very writerly.
I think I had that in mind a little bit too, because I was aspiring to develop as a writer as well.
Awesome.
Well, so fun. How are you doing today? Where are you right now? Are you on the East Coast or the West Coast?
No, I'm in Oakland in the Bay Area.
Okay, all right.
So we're having a rough moment with all the fires, and we're not right here in Oakland. We're not afraid of fires, but the air is really bad, and I'm the kind of girl who needs to walk in the woods regularly, and that's been sort of impossible for a while. So it's really sad.
Yeah, I grew up in the San Fernando Valley.
Oh, you know.
So I have some friends, not a lot. A lot of people moved away, but I know some people still there, and it's bad. It's a bad situation.
Absolutely.
But I'm glad to hear you're okay.
Just looking at how easy it is to not see the big picture and sense the interconnectedness of life, and there's karma. Here it is in our faces.
Really, I know. And it's like, are we going to listen to the messages that the planet's giving us or not?
Repeatedly?
Man, yeah. I know. I don't want to go down that, Paul. I don't want to go down that route, right? Maybe later if we want. But right now, okay. I want to say thanks, because we don't know each other at all. And I appreciate you accepting my invitation. And, just for you to know, where my initial motivation came from is, I know your name forever. And I think that's because so many, strong teachers I've met trained with you.
Oh, that's great. I love to hear that.
Yeah. And so you've always been someone in my mind who was a kind of a teacher trainer before teacher training boomed as much as it did.
That's true.
Yeah. And then I've been, I had a yoga center in Williamsburg, Brooklyn for 10 years.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I sold it a year and a half ago and moved to Pennsylvania with my family.
Oh.
And so some of what this podcast has been about is kind of sorting through what happened in industry during that 10-year period that I was in my little bubble.
Yeah.
And, I developed a teacher training program, which I did twice a year at the center, which is basically what I lived off of. because I didn't make any money off of the classes. Like they barely paid for the center. And so now I am sort of struggling with the whole model, the whole teacher training business model. I'm doing I'm doing one-to-one training right now a little bit more, but you can't do 20 people at the same time,
Yeah.
And so in any case, I'm putting that all out to you just so you know where I thought you would have a perspective on some of this, because I know you are someone who's been doing teacher training for a long time, and you're somebody who goes like as far back, if not farther back than me, kind of like in the yoga world.
I certainly have teachers who were practicing before I was as committed as I am, the last 30 years. But yeah, I've been at it a long time. And I've certainly watched, what used to be a sort of, no one expected to make any money. That was not the point. It was service, to a place where it has become a career. So yeah, I've watched that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's odd.
I figured that. See, you have that vantage point of like before the internet and after the internet.
Absolutely.
Like me.
Yeah.
And so in any case, I'm curious to get some perspective on that with you today, and specifically about some aspects of what we've been doing with teacher training and how we might do it better.
Okay.
But I also want to just go back a little bit down some memory lanes and see where our paths may have paralleled and where they may have not. Because I know you were in New York before you were on the West Coast, right? I grew up on the West Coast and moved to the East Coast. You grew up on the East Coast, right? In Virginia, I read in your bio. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. And I moved to New York. I went to college in San Francisco in the 70s. Oh. And then I moved to New York right around 1980. And my work at that time was dancing and teaching dance, but I was at the Integral Yoga Institute downtown, down on the Lower West Side. I think it's still there, like 13th Street.
Yeah. I think it's still there.
And at that time, Satchidananda was there often. It was a really magical time to just be around those people.
Mm-hmm. I talked with Sam Rudra Schwartz and Jivana Heyman, and they talked about kind of living at the ashram and the earlier time of when like the New York was sort of like this pilot place for them and everything.
Yeah. And those people absolutely worked for free. I mean, we gave donation to pay for the classes we took, but, nobody was making any money. It was so not the point,
Yeah. I talked with, oh my God, her name is escaping me. How is that possible? She wrote that wonderful translation of the sutras. She was a Satchidananda disciple. Oh my God, her name is killing me. But she said the greatest thing. She talked about.
Do you mean Joy?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
She's awesome.
Yes. I talked with her, and she told me about how like they were doing classes for free, and then at some point they started asking for donations, and people complained. And she said, well, the yoga's for free, but the electricity is not.
Right? And rent in New York, even then, we thought rent was high back then,
Yeah, that's right. It just skyrocketed. That's basically why I couldn't last more than 10 years in Williamsburg. The rents go up and up. Yeah. But so you were doing dance stuff, and then you got a yoga bug going at the Integral Center. Is that the deal? Yeah,
no, I had been doing yoga before. In high school, I started up because I was in rehab for a little drug situation. So it was always just this little refuge for me. It was always, like connecting with my meeting, so to speak.
Gotcha.
So, I was a pretty talented dancer, and I loved it. But I'm not the kind of person that deals well with stress and competition. So, at the end of the day, unless we were performing at night, I would head down and practice at Integral Yoga just for sanity. It was truly a sanctuary for me. And I just loved the community. And I think there in that community, I didn't feel like I had to be anybody or look any way or be strong or, be anything. It was just, come as you are.
You didn't feel any kind of pressure to accept Satchidananda as your guru?
No, I didn't. And, when, often when he would do big talks, it would be like up at Riverside Church or something like that. And, he was so full of light and funny. It was just, it just really reminded me that religiosity and even enlightenment does not mean you can't have fun, which really resonates with my personality. It's like, I want to have fun.
I agree. I've come to feel like a little bit of silly is actually more spiritual than like too serious.
Well, and that's how he was. I mean, he would drop these profound statements and then, joke is the wrong word, but there would be a lighthearted, and we would chuckle. It was great. Mm-hmm. He was so inspiring. No, I didn't feel like I had to drop everything and, become celibate except for him or, whatever nonsense.
Yeah.
No, it was a really positive influence on me, those people.
Right. So, but you were teaching dance at that time. Is that right?
Yeah, I was teaching and performing. That was how I made a living.
Right. And it's interesting what you said, because I did some dance. Like I started out in theater and then I got disenchanted with words. And I started going into some movement stuff like contact improv and like postmodern dance stuff at the experimental theater wing at NYU. And I did like some dancing. And at some point for me, though, I got a little whiff of it from you that I felt I really enjoyed the rehearsal process. Like I enjoyed making stuff and exploring things. But the performing was a lot of anxiety around that. And it was so much about like kind of a need for approval from other people for me personally. Yeah. And yoga kind of became my way out of that, out of feeling like I had to be a performer or something. Because I had done that in high school and like I'd always been performing. And then at some point it was a way to kind of transition out of that.
What years were you in New York?
I moved to New York in 1990 to go to school. I went to my...
So you're 10, 15 years younger than me.
I think that might be about right. I'm 46.
Yeah, I'm 61.
Wow. All right. Well, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said wow. That sounded... I was only surprised because I didn't... You're older than I thought you were. I hope that wasn't an insulting thing. I hope you'll take it as a compliment.
Not at all. It's no problem.
All right. Thank you.
I'm doing well. I'm happy,
Yeah.
The good news is I'm still here.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, not everybody has stuck it out for as long as you have. And so I guess that early time in the, I guess we're talking the 80s in New York, you're teaching. When does yoga become more of like a focus in terms of your teaching work? When do you start to transition out of dance towards more of like yoga being your main gig?
Not until the early 90s. It was, back then there wasn't like official teacher trainings like we have now by Yoga Alliance and all that. So I did some, weekend intensives, both Iyengar and some more like retreat weekends with the integral people. And then I remember I was teaching at university in a dance department, and dance is intense, and this university had a really big performance program. And in the wintertime when we were doing Nutcracker a million times, the dancers were just wiped out. And, here they are, 18, 19, maybe 20 years old, really asked to work like professionals and keep their studies up. And so on Friday afternoon in the advanced modern class, they would say, Annie, can we do yoga? Mm. And I would send the pianist home and, untrained, except for all my years of practice, I would give them a yoga class, and they just loved it. And I did too. Mm. And at that point, I was hardly performing anymore and choreographing occasionally. It was all sort of winding down. And what I observed is that my morning practice, rather than being a dance class with kind of yoga fitting in where I could, my morning practice was yoga.
See, that's what I was going to ask you. I was going to say, were you modeling a particular teacher? But you're saying it was your practice you were doing for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I was, at that time, I was mostly practicing Iyengar, 3-4 days a week. You know how Iyengar is, you kind of go in and they give you something to work on.
Yeah.
And that suited me because the alignment was taking care of my body.
And were you doing that at the Iyengar Center when, like, you weren't just at the Shivananda Center anymore? You were going to the Iyengar Center as well?
Yeah, I was going to the Iyengar Center, which back then was down near the, what's that? The building looks like a triangle.
I know what you're talking about, but I can't remember the names either. My brain's
like
not
20th
fine.
Street, sort of vaguely east side, but barely east, upstairs. So I practiced there. But also at this point, I was teaching in a university, I believe it or not, in the Midwest. Hated it. Hated the Midwest. There was an Iyengar teacher, a very good Iyengar teacher there called Lori Collins, and I practiced with her. Anyway, it was just this gradual thing where I just wasn't interested in how many pirouettes someone, and always having to grade people on, their quote art. And just the whole idea of university, it didn't go with me very well. So I took the summer off in a sabbatical to go to LA and practice with Chuck Miller. Everyone said you'll love Chuck Miller. And at that point, I was just dabbling in Ashtanga.
And how did you find Chuck? Just from your
just
dating?
Friends saying, "Oh, you're going to love this guy," and yeah, it's time for you to do Ashtanga. Because I didn't have the physicality of my dance anymore. I was a little bit of a physical beast. I really needed to move and work hard. That's less true now.
I understand. It changed for me as time went on as well.
And so it turned out they were doing a teacher training there at the Yoga Works in Santa Monica. This was back when there was only the two little studios.
Yeah.
And so Mati and Lisa Walford, who was an Iyengar teacher, were leading it. Now, again, this was 6 weekends. There was no 200-hour bullshit.
Right.
I did it, and at the end, Mati said, you should stay and teach. So I called my dean. I said, I'm not coming back. I called my husband, who we were sort of broken up anyway, and I said, I'm not coming back. Wow. And I moved to Santa Monica and started teaching there. I had a couple of grants for some choreography pieces, so I had some money. And but it worked really fast. I got a bunch of classes. I got a bunch of privates, and it was no problem. It was easy. It was shockingly easy how quickly I was. I mean, not good. I wasn't rich, but I was living.
It was a very boom time. I think it was parallel both in New York and in Los Angeles. I talked with Eric Schiffman, and he talked about Madi saying the same thing to him. And at that time, I know even in New York, I started teaching in 95, 96 in Manhattan. And I just remember getting random calls for private students.
Yeah.
Out of nowhere. I was making I made a lot of money in 97, 98, those were really, there wasn't a lot of yoga centers or teachers yet. It hadn't really boomed, but it was becoming popular. And it was kind of, so you made the leap though to the other side. I talked with Sean Korn. She did a similar thing. She leapt to the other side as well.
Yeah, Sean and Eric were actually already teaching. I mean, I think Sean was a brand new teacher, but she was at least a year or so ahead of me at Yoga Works. So whatever year that was, all those years run together in my head.
Yeah, it's fine. I've got it written here because I had your bio. It says that you studied with them in 95, so sometime around there.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds right. I think I was in India in Mysore in 97 because I believe I turned 40.
That was going to be my next question because I know you made some meccas. That's been another thing. Your generation and the generation before you. I don't know if that's they were all going to India and meeting the gurus. Yeah,
it felt really important. I have to do this. But also, what was really cool, and I didn't realize this was part of it for me. I had always worked. I'd had a job in the summer and in college. All of that. And to take 2 months off and just go to some exotic land where you don't need much money and just practice and hang out with yogis and go back for the Dharma chat in the afternoon was amazing. Yeah. Just to take 2 months, no job, and just practice. It was transformative.
Yeah, I did that. I did a 3-month trip there, but I didn't go to study, just to travel around. But
you just traveled around. Yeah.
I just traveled around, but I definitely know what you mean, especially at a pivotal time when you're really trying to evaluate stuff, or if you're at any kind of crossroads. At least where I was. But I guess did you go to study with Mr. Iyengar or Patabi Joyce or both?
No, just Patabi Joyce. I was a committed Ashtangi at that point. I was in Ashtangi. It was only about 8 years. I got, pretty far into third series. I didn't ever complete the whole thing. But I didn't start until my, 40s, or late 30s, I guess. So, I think I was 45, 46, and I fell and wrecked my knee, and I could never get fully back into it. It was just too hard had a couple of surgeries. But also it was a really good time because I had spent, approximately 8-10 years with the Integral Institute, about 8 or 10 years, primarily Iyengar, and then about 8 or 10 years in Ashtanga. And then I looked at myself in my mid-40s and, a little bad knee and a little not so great shoulder. And I said, wait, what's this all about for you? Mm. And I was really getting less and less happy with Yoga Works. And, I just kind of said, yeah, let's forge the things that really matter and make this work. And so slowly, gradually, I evolved away from Yoga Works, which was becoming more and more rote because they were expanding so quickly. I was having to train new trainers who had been teaching for 3 years, for God's sake. It was ridiculous.
Well, wait a second. Before we get to the expanding of Yoga Works, no, that's okay. That's where I wanted to go. But I feel compelled because honestly, I just recorded like several episodes with people from the Ashtanga community, and this will post sometime after them. But I feel compelled. Like I have to ask you if in those trips to Pattabhi, Joyce, you were aware of the sexual assaults that were happening.
I was aware, when I was in the room, I mean, this is way back in the day when the room held 12 people, so it was really intimate. It was hard to avoid what was happening with other people. But at the same time, if you didn't focus on what you were doing on your mat, you didn't get anything done. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I hear that.
But I remember distinctly there was a very young gal, like 21, from, I think she was from London, and he did that horrible adjustment where he stood on her thighs in Baddha Konasana, and we heard these 2 giant pops. And he'd popped her groin ligaments. I don't know if it's a Y ligament or one of the adductor ligaments, tendons. Anyway, she couldn't walk for a few days, and she flew home. Mm-hmm. So I was more aware of that. But I have to tell you, mind you, I was 39. And a lot of the people there were a lot younger than me. He was so gentle with me. And mind you, I was doing he'd help me walk my hands up the back of my leg in my drop backs. I had a pretty big practice at the time, but he was so gentle with me. And like that famous adjustment that we've heard about lately in the Supta Padangusthasana 2, where he kind of lies on you. He did the same thing with men. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I don't know there, Annie, because one, he may have been gentle with you, but he wasn't gentle with other people.
No, I know.
And I watched some video footage where he was doing this assist, but you could see him go around the room, and he clearly did it different to all the women than he did to the men. So sometimes people say he did it to men, and I don't know if that's a good. I think again, I don't think it's smart to try to explain why he did that stuff to people, especially because some of it I think even does violate certain lines, even in terms if you want to look at as a law thing, But I guess it goes to something that we've been talking about, is that there was a different culture in the yoga world and in our kind of societies in general at that time than now.
And I will say that, his attire for teaching, now mind you, I don't know if this felt weird to him because, dhotis are weird, but he wore Calvin Klein boxer shorts. That's what he wore, which if that were happening in America, we'd be appalled, So, is it inappropriate in his culture? Is it disgusting? A little bit. It's disgusting. I don't think I ever felt that he was inappropriate in the sense that he thought or was getting, off sort of sexually. Was it inappropriate? Would I, if I had someone I was training who behaved anything like that, would I smack him upside the head? Absolutely. I would say, please don't. That's so inappropriate. But I have to believe that in his culture, for the most part, there just wasn't a lot of consciousness.
I'm worried about that too, because I think it doesn't have to be sexual to be abuse.
No, I agree with you. Yeah. I see it clearly as abuse, sexually and otherwise. And I also feel like his intention wasn't that. It was just sort of blind, stupid, never thought about it before, never thought he'd be doing yoga with women in his room, much less scantily clad women. I just think it was, the world was going so fast, he didn't know how to set a boundary because he'd never had to before.
Well, but he also did it even after people told him not to do it. He didn't, people told him that it wasn't okay and to stop doing it, and he still did it. See, here's the issue. We don't need to get, again, for me, there's two tracks. There's one, which you kind of alluded to before, which is like the hard adjustments hurting people. But then there's this other track that we're talking about now, which is the sexual assaults. And the issue there is only that he's someone who was lionized as a master yogi. And he has been shown clearly, and I don't think it's accusations anymore, to have assaulted women. And I don't know that those two things really go together so much. And
well, let me add one more thing to that negative mix. In my store, at least at that time, we would practice, physical practice in the morning. We'd come back in the afternoon for quote unquote Dharma chat. And sometimes it was really sweet and we could ask questions and it was very inspiring. But often enough, we'd go in, he'd be reading the paper and he would trash Muslims. I mean, full on politically trash Muslims, the same sort of nationalism shit that we're having to deal with right now with Trump. And, I would walk away from the shala and I would think to myself, wait, this is supposed to be a man who is evolved, maybe enlightened, maybe not. And, that was very problematic for me too. Yeah,
actually, I spoke with Karen Rainey, and she actually brought up like certain business dealings where he took money from people too. Like he wasn't a great model to live up to or to put up. See, that's what I'm saying. The people before me, they all had pictures of him up on the altars. And they're prostrating at the pictures, Yeah,
that's not me. That never was me.
Yeah.
I learned about dedication, devotion to practice, the sort of everyday you do, which, of course had already been drilled into me since I was a kid dancing, but, in a way of every day you do for yourself, for life itself, for understanding that we are one, so that hopefully you can live a better life for, yourself, your family, and the planet. And in that sense, every day you do, I felt like I learned a great, great lesson and was inspired by him. And yes, the rest of it is awful.
And nobody ever said to you, he did this to me, or came to you with something like that?
An only injury situation.
Yeah. And that is the other thread. And I talked with Gregor Male about that as well. And that's kind of launched him out when Sharat basically jumped on his knees and they swelled up to footballs. And another teacher came to him and said, hey, don't go back in there. They don't know what they're doing to your knees. You got to take care of yourself.
Yeah. Like I said, I know I was quote unquote lucky because I didn't have anything but positive experiences. But, I certainly have friends. And while I was there, I saw people, hobble out of there because of really stupid adjustments.
And so you were there for a bit of time, but then you're back in LA, in Santa Monica at a booming time. And so do you remember when it really sort of took off, the vinyasa yoga became the thing?
Yeah.
And then teacher training, they were already, so the teacher training that you did with Mati and them, that wasn't a 200-hour, but I think it was around 97 that's when the Yoga Alliance actually announced the 200-hour thing.
Was it? I remember a meeting on Main Street with people who were forming Yoga Alliance, and there was a bunch of different, it was kind of cool because there was a Kundalini teacher sitting next to me. One of the Anusara people, I can't remember, it might have been Noah, I can't remember. Anyway, there was a whole group of different teachers, as sort of the panel, and we were talking about, and I kept saying,
if you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of Jay Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium. Premium.